I'm a middle-aged, white, gay male. And it's quite funny to me that I can tell you I'm a gay male. It's easier for me to tell you that here than middle-aged. These days, that's a little more difficult, but it's not always been that way. You see, I grew up in a privileged family in rural Ohio, a farm community. We didn't have everything, but we were privileged. I didn't have to worry about what I was going to eat. I didn't have to worry about where I was going to sleep. I didn't have to worry about going to a store and being followed because somebody didn't trust me. In fact, most people trusted everybody in that community. My brother and I, my brother Bo, he is 2.5 years older than me. I'm sure that we were picked on when we were children for different reasons, but like my brother, he had glasses. And I think I might have been the one calling him Four Eyes, I'm not sure. And I know that he had a tough time wearing husky pants. And so his fears, he had to overcome some of those fears. So in junior high and high school, he became a wrestler, he was a football player, and quite successful. You know, we fought like crazy. We were so different as children. I had other things that people teased me about. One of those things was that I loved to decorate cakes. I wanted to be a baker. And in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s, that was really unacceptable in rural Ohio. That was the girls' thing to do. I also wanted to twirl baton. That's really embarrassing for me to say. But there's a reality that that's where my focus was. That's where my interest was, in doing things that I would enjoy, but I learned very quickly that was unacceptable. So I went into wrestling, swimming, track, and learned to change my life in some way. My brother was able to overcome the teasing and ribbing and became quite popular in his class and didn't have the struggles. I also became popular in my class, but I was hiding all of my truth and lying everywhere I could. And it had its toll, and it took its toll. In my family, we were supposed to sit around the table every evening at about 5:30 and have our meals, and that's where we solved family problems. That's where we would discuss things, and we learned about boundaries, we learned about structure, we learned that we had to eat our broccoli, whether we wanted to or not. And we would sit there and discuss things, but there was still always a secret. I knew at 4 years old my attractions. It was not until about 1984, my brother sat me down and he said, "When are you going to acknowledge that you're gay?" I wasn't ready to hear that. He was demonstrating that he was still at our table and he was going to accept me for who I was, where I was, but I couldn't hear it because society was telling me it was unacceptable. We're talking the 80s here. We're talking the AIDS epidemic. I couldn't be that. There's no way I could be that. So I immersed myself in faith, in church, in trying to change myself to become somebody different, even though there was a person in my life that was going to accept me and love me. I couldn't hear it. I hated myself so much based upon what society was telling me was right and wrong. I hated myself so much that I even went toward being a pastor, trying to change those things, and I became a pastor. And it was then in, 1998, I think, I started to deal with myself and accept myself for who I was, and started to come out a little bit, and as a pastor, I was fired because they found out. And ordination was removed, and there was no chance of continuing in that role. But it was really a freeing thing for me, is that I became this person of acceptance, this person that could finally find out what congruence was about, that I could be honest in all areas. It was interesting when I got fired, though. It was a small community on the coast here in North Carolina, and they asked me, "Where are you going?" And I told them, "I'm not going anywhere. You are going to have to figure out how to live with me in the decisions you have made about me." just because you know some new things about me. So I stayed there. It reminds me of some of the writing of Bell Hooks, a female feminist who writes, and she says, for the marginalized to become equitable, first they must create themselves to be the object of study. I never knew what I was really doing. I just was doing it because I'm tenacious and I'm not going to be driven out of places easily. So I stayed there. And I wanted to make sure that I was able to live my life the way I wanted to with friends that were in that neighborhood. Super Bowl night, 2000. I don't remember who played. I don't remember who won. I was coming out of a club in Wilmington, North Carolina. And it was a gay club. It was after the game was over, and it changed my life in some ways. I came out of the club, and there was somebody sitting outside the door, a male, and he's quite good looking. I was wondering, maybe I am finding my new husband here. I don't know. And he approached me, and he started talking to me. He was smiling. He was warm. He was flirting with me. I was like, okay. So we were walking back toward my car, and he had on, this was 2000, so he had on big bell-bottom pants. And I said, you got some big old pants on there, you know? He said, you really think so, you effing faggot? Bam. He blindsided me. I didn't see it coming. He ran away, and I'm trying to figure out what just happened. I looked over, and I saw him over there, and I saw him turn around and start to come back. I unlocked my car, I jumped in my car, locked the door, and he started beating on the window, kicking the window, trying to break it. He broke the mirror off of my car. I started the car. He jumped in front of it so I couldn't get away. And he pulled out a gun. I put my foot on that accelerator hoping to hit him. I don't know what happened after that. I didn't hit him. But I do know that I got out of this situation, and I found my way to a friend's house who didn't recognize me in the moment. Interestingly, that event changed my life in one of the most positive ways because it did not crush me. It did not create for me to believe that I was lesser. Instead, what it did is it increased my understanding that I have to live fully in myself and make sure that I advocate for myself and for other people like me. Life-changing. That then brought me to UNC Charlotte, where I learned about multiculturalism, diversity, intersectionality, and I learned about working with people that were different than me, people that were like me, and I also learned about my implicit bias, those biases I have that I am unaware of. I learned about my own racism that I don't want to have, but it is there. I wish it weren't there, but it is. And so I learned that I have to continuously look at that, and I became an expert in these things. About 10 years ago, I was sitting on the porch of our neighbors across the street, and we live here in Charlotte, uptown, in a gentrified neighborhood. Beautiful neighborhood. Before that, it was an area where there were a lot of drugs. There's a lot of crime. They came in, they wiped it out, and they rebuilt. On one side of that neighborhood was subsidized housing, and on the other side of that neighborhood was subsidized housing. Both have been gentrified since then. But what would take place is we would have groups of kids coming through our linear walkway, and you will hear implicit bias in my story right now. You will hear some of the racism that I wish weren't there, because I will identify they were African-American children coming through our neighborhood. In my expertise, I thought I could go and I thought I could help what was going to take place. We heard this screaming from a little girl coming down through the linear walkway. She was screaming, she was crying, raging, snotting all over herself. And I, rather than sitting and watching, I'm like, I might be able to help diffuse this. Behind her was a group of friends, maybe 8 to 10 of her friends. I think she was 8 years old. They may have been from 8 to 12, somewhere around there. In my expertise, I'm going to go help them. I'm going to go diffuse the situation, that I'm okay and uncomfortable in this situation. It didn't go that way. It did not go well. In fact, I made the situation much worse. It wasn't until years later, and even in the last year, that I've realized and I've learned what other people already knew. I think I was the last one to learn it. Is I went believing I was the expert, and I was absolutely the one that needed to learn in this situation. That little girl started to call me names, started hitting on me, and her friends joined her. They had her back. And I was bigger. They were about this tall. And I kept walking, hoping that I could help them get home. And they were hitting on me and hitting me with sticks. It was not traumatic for me. I thought I was helping, strangely enough. But the reality was, when she looked at me, she saw this man, this white man, that belonged to a supremacist society that she was part of, and that kept her and her family down. I have to own that. Bell Hooks also talks about, why are white men writing history books for black women? Who was the expert in that situation? That 8-year-old little girl was the expert. She had a lot to teach me, and I've been learning it for 10 years. It's very emotional for me when I talk about it. I wish I knew who she was. I wish I knew who she is today, so that we might sit at the table and dialogue. I don't have that opportunity now. I lost out. But the experience has been teaching me a lot. She was her own expert. I'm going to switch this back to my brother, this is my brother Bo, Chief Lowell Nance, and we are so different. You might be able to tell that just from the picture and looking at me, I don't know, but we are very different. He likes different sports. I'm not a NASCAR fan. That's hard to say around here in Charlotte. What he has shown me over the years, he's got my back. This man has been sitting at a table many times, and I haven't been able to come to that table. What I've realized as a counselor, as a therapist, when we think about conflict, when we think about our society now, we think about this dichotomy that we are living in right now. I don't think we have to be in it. We have been dichotomized in ways that our politicians need us to be dichotomized. They are important issues. None of this is to take away from issues. None of this is to take away from the institutions needing to change. It's more about when people we love are difficult to approach. Now, I'm probably saying that more about him to me than me to him. I may be difficult to approach sometimes out of my expertise. So, as a therapist, there's times where I'm sitting with couples and I'm watching couples argue and feud, and they're trying to figure out, are we staying together, are we getting a divorce? And in this moment, they're getting a divorce, okay? There's an institute, the Gottman Institute, that's in Seattle, Washington. They put heart rate monitors on their couples. And they have found over time that if a person's heart rate gets above 100 beats per minute, they can no longer reason and dialogue effectively. My heart rate right now is probably over 100. I don't know. And I'm hoping to keep dialoguing effectively. But when we look at those couples and we see them raging at each other, we have already tried to teach them how to manage themselves before managing dialogue. What we try to work on with people are their cognitions often, their thought processes. If you think about all of the distortions that we're living with right now in our society, we have this dichotomy of thought process, either or. You're for me or you're against me. We have what will happen tomorrow, the catastrophized. What if? We have the shoulds, oughts, and musts. The shoulds, you should. You need to. You must. Hear the yous in there? It's not an I. So I'm sitting there with these couples every once in a while. I'm sitting with individuals once in a while, and I'm going, gosh, this is intense. They need a therapist. I go, oh, wait, I am their therapist. What do I do with this? So then I start to look at these 4 conditions that the Gottmans describe, and they call them the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. These 4 horsemen would sound like defensiveness, stonewalling, and we do this on social media, block, okay? A stonewalling is going out of the room, shutting down the conversation. There's also then contempt. You're an idiot. You don't know what you're talking about. And we see that in all of the comments below those memes on social media. We are all victims of this. I believe we are victims of this. If I can't do this, if I can't see this for myself, how do I expect my clients and the people around me to do it? So this is more maybe about a reminder to myself than you. I don't know that. But I think we are all caught up in the social media dichotomy, and it's led by politics, the ideal lifestyle, the ideal vacation, and the ideal looks, and many more things. What do we do with it? I have to remember my brother is sitting at the table. You know, we sat there with my mother in the room watching us dialogue for about 2 hours one day about a year ago after his retirement. He said, you know, I have earned every bit of my retirement pension. You know what? I believe him. I agree with him. What I heard him say is, I'm afraid I'm going to lose it. But I didn't hear that in the moment. Now looking at it, I was hearing his emotions saying, I'm afraid. What happens if I lose control? One of the cognitive distortions is what if, predicting the outcome, and then also the idea that I must be in control of all things at all times. If I'm not in control of all things at all times, then the world is not right and I'm not okay. These are cognitive fallacies. So one of the tasks I'm challenging us all to do is to listen to the emotion underneath the other person that we're dialoguing with. What is it they're saying about themselves? It's easy for me to sit with marginalized individuals and understand what they're saying and listen to how they experience marginalization and pain, because there's some part of me that can understand that with them. I'm not an expert in their marginalization. They are their own experts. The tough piece of this, and I got my brother's permission to talk about this, is I'm talking about not only the marginalized, but I'm talking about the majority, those who might feel disenfranchised. Not necessarily marginalized, but disenfranchised. Their emotions to them are real, and if I stonewall, if I defend myself against their emotions, I'm disregarding them as a person. The challenge is, how do I go toward them in their emotions? How do I sit and understand what he is saying about himself, letting my heart be okay? So my hope is that we can know ourselves, be confident in ourselves, that we someday will be able to sit at that table and hear the person across from us. Thank you, and I think I need to go call my brother.